My fiancée insisted I give her parents part of my business before our wedding. When I said no, she threatened to walk away, so I did this. My wedding was 3 months away, and I thought I was ready. Then my fiancée, Chloe, asked me to sign over a chunk of my company, my entire life's work, to her parents as a wedding present. It was a request so outrageous, it shattered my world. The air around us felt thick, heavy with unspoken expectations. I was about to find out exactly what kind of future she truly envisioned for us, and it wasn't the one I'd planned. I'm Liam, 33, and I own a tech consulting business. I built it from absolutely nothing. No inheritance, no safety net, just me grinding 16-hour days in a tiny apartment, eating ramen, and refusing to quit when everyone told me to get a real job. The company finally took off about 2 years ago. We landed some huge contracts. Suddenly I had 12 employees, a real office, and could actually breathe without checking my bank account every morning. I met Chloe about 18 months ago. It was at one of those painfully sterile networking events, but she was different. Confident, funny, not taking herself too seriously. When she walked up to me and said, "You look like you'd rather be literally anywhere else," I was hooked. We started dating, and things moved fast. She was ambitious, driven, working in marketing, and she seemed to just get the entrepreneurial life in a way others didn't. Or so I thought. 6 months in, I proposed at the little restaurant where we'd had our first real date. She said yes, and just like that, we were planning a wedding for the following spring. That felt reasonable, plenty of time to organize everything. Wedding planning started simple, but Chloe gradually took over every detail: the venue, the flowers, catering, the guest list. Honestly, I didn't mind. I was swamped at work, and she seemed to love it. We weren't living together yet, so it made sense for her to handle logistics while I focused on a massive project rollout. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were pleasant enough. Her mom always smiled, asking about the business. Her dad was quieter, but seemed supportive. They lived in a nice suburban house about an hour away, comfortable, not wealthy. They genuinely seemed happy their daughter was marrying someone financially stable. About 3 months before the wedding, I started noticing Chloe's small comments. Little remarks about her parents' sacrifices for her education, how they deserve to enjoy retirement, how family should take care of family. Nothing alarming, just enough to make me think she was hinting I might help them financially someday. I wasn't opposed to it, if it was reasonable and discussed openly. Then came the kitchen conversation. We were at my place making dinner, a Thursday evening. She was chopping vegetables, I was prepping chicken, and she brought it up so casually, I almost missed the weight of her words. "I've been thinking about a really meaningful gift we could give my parents," she said, not even looking up. I assumed she meant like a vacation or helping with home renovations. "Sure," I said. "What did you have in mind?" And that's when she dropped it. "What if we gifted them shares in your company? It would be such a beautiful gesture, showing them they're part of our future." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking, playing some kind of prank. But when I looked at her face, I saw she was dead serious. The smile was still there, but her eyes watched me, waiting. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I put down the knife I was holding. "Do you understand what you're actually suggesting?" I asked. She nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world, talking about how it was symbolic, how it showed respect, how it brought them into the family business. That word, symbolic, stuck with me because there's nothing symbolic about signing over actual equity in a company. That's real ownership, real voting rights, real financial stake. But she was framing it like giving someone a decorative plate. I tried to explain the reality. How in an S-corp, you can't just gift shares without serious legal and tax implications. How her parents would literally own part of my business, with rights to profits, and potentially a say in major decisions. But she kept minimizing every point I made with that dismissive wave of her hand she always used when she didn't like what she was hearing. She insisted I was overcomplicating it, that other people do this all the time, and it was just paperwork my lawyer could figure out. When I explained that no, other people actually don't do this, that equity in a private company isn't some token you hand out at family gatherings, she switched tactics. She started talking about how they wouldn't interfere, how they wouldn't even know what to do with it, how it was just about the gesture. That's when I realized she either fundamentally didn't understand, or didn't care to understand, what she was asking for. The conversation went in circles for about 20 minutes. Her insisting it was simple and meaningful, me trying to explain why this was an insane request. The more I pushed back, the more frustrated she became. Not sad, not understanding, just annoyed that I wasn't immediately agreeing. Eventually, she dropped it with a tight-lipped comment about how I should just think about it, and we finished dinner in uncomfortable silence. That night, I barely slept. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation. Where had this come from? We'd never discussed anything like this. Her parents had never expressed interest in my business beyond polite questions. Why now? Why 3 months before the wedding? Why framed as a gift instead of a straightforward financial planning conversation? The more I thought, the more wrong it felt. Not just the request, but the way she presented it, casual, inevitable, like my agreement was just a formality. I'd worked 80-hour weeks to build this company. I'd risked everything. I'd signed personal guarantees on loans that would have destroyed me. And now she wanted me to just hand over a piece of that to people who contributed nothing, not capital, not labor, not expertise, just because they were her parents. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Cheerful, affectionate, making coffee and talking about wedding RSVPs. I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted, that maybe this was just a weird idea she'd drop once she thought about it clearly. But something in my gut told me this conversation wasn't over. And I was right. She came back to it 3 days later, as we drove to finalize details with our wedding venue. Casual as anything, like she was asking me to pick up milk. Have you thought more about the share situation? I told her I had, and my answer was still no. It wasn't happening. I watched her jaw tighten for a second before she forced a smile and said okay in a tone that clearly meant it was not okay. Over the next 2 weeks, she brought it up 6 more times. Each approach slightly different, testing new pressure points, like she was running experiments to see what would crack me. First, it was about connections. How her dad knew a city council member who could help with permits. How her mom was in a book club with the CFO of a regional hospital chain that could become a massive client. Framing the shares as a networking investment. When I pointed out I'd built my client base just fine without needing her parents' connections, and I didn't plan to mix family with business development, she switched tactics immediately. Then it became about our future, about how when we had kids, we'd need her parents' help. How they'd want to be involved, but would need to feel valued and included first. Like giving them equity now was some kind of down payment on future babysitting. The logic was so twisted, I didn't even know where to begin unpacking it. But what bothered me most was how calculated it all felt. Like she'd mapped out every argument, every emotional lever she could pull. The real turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. I was at the office, catching up. My phone rang. Her mom's name, Mrs. Thompson, on the screen. That was unusual. We had a pleasant but surface-level relationship, maybe a dozen conversations total. I answered, expecting a wedding question. Instead, she opened with, "I wanted to thank you personally for your incredibly generous idea." My stomach dropped. I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her to clarify, and she laughed, a warm, grateful laugh that made everything worse. She explained how Chloe had told them I wanted to bring them into the business as a wedding gift. How touched they were, how much it meant to know I saw them as real partners in our future. I sat there, trying to process what I was hearing. Chloe had told them this was happening. Had presented it as my idea. had gotten them excited and grateful for something I'd explicitly said no to. And now her mom was thanking me like it was a done deal. I managed to say something non-committal about still discussing details. But Mrs. Thompson kept going, talking about how proud they were, how they'd always known Chloe would marry someone who understood the importance of family. Every word felt like another layer of a trap closing around me. When I finally got off the phone, I just sat there, staring at my computer screen, seeing nothing. What game was being played? She'd gone behind my back. Made promises using my company as currency. Created expectations with her parents that would now make me look like the bad guy when I said no. And she'd done it all without a single conversation with me about whether this was remotely acceptable. I called her immediately. Told her we needed to talk, now. When she showed up at my place an hour later, she had this defensive posture before I'd even said anything, arms crossed, standing in my doorway, ready for a fight. I confronted her about the phone call, about her mom thanking me for the generous gift of shares I was apparently giving them. I watched something flicker across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like annoyance that her plan had been exposed too early. She shrugged. Actually shrugged. Claiming she'd just mentioned we were considering it, that she didn't say it was definite. But that wasn't what her mom had said at all. Her mom had been crystal clear, this was happening, I wanted to do this. When I pointed that out, Chloe pivoted to offense. She asked why I was making such a big deal out of this, insisting it was just shares, just a gesture. Accusing me of acting like she was trying to steal my company. She said it with this exasperated tone, like I was being dramatic and unreasonable, like she was the victim of my overreaction. I told her this wasn't about the value or the gesture. This was about her making decisions about my business without my consent. About her creating obligations I never agreed to. About her fundamentally not respecting that this company was mine, and mine alone. She rolled her eyes. Literally rolled her eyes at me. Then she started talking about how I was selfish. How this is what people do when they get married. They merge lives. They bring families together. They make sacrifices. The word sacrifices hit me wrong. This wasn't her sacrifice to make. She wasn't giving up anything. She was volunteering my work, my risk, my years of grinding, and calling it teamwork. The argument went on for another 30 minutes, circular and exhausting. Her insisting I was short-sighted and didn't understand how successful families operate. Me trying to explain that successful families don't operate through financial manipulation and broken boundaries. Eventually, she left, slamming my apartment door hard enough that I heard my neighbor's dog start barking. I called Mark, my best friend since college. The guy who'd helped me move equipment when I was running the business out of my apartment, who'd listened to me stress about payroll and contracts for years. I told him everything. The initial request, the repeated pressure, the phone call with her mom, all of it. When I finished, there was a long silence on his end before he finally spoke. He told me straight up that this was run for the hills bad. That this wasn't about shares. This was about her thinking she could manipulate me into anything if she just pushed hard enough. And what would happen when we were married and she wanted something else? Would I cave then, too? I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it real. Impossible to rationalize away. That evening, Chloe sent me a text. No apology. Just a simple message that felt more like an ultimatum than an olive branch, saying we needed to figure this out before the wedding, that either I did it or this relationship wouldn't work. I stared at that text for a long time, sitting on my couch in the dark, trying to remember when things had shifted from partnership to hostage negotiation. She wasn't asking me to compromise. She wasn't suggesting middle ground. She was drawing a line and telling me to choose between my boundaries and my relationship. And the fact that she thought that was acceptable told me everything I needed to know. The morning after that ultimatum text, I made a decision that probably should have come weeks earlier. I called Sarah, the lawyer who'd helped me set up the business structure 3 years ago. She'd been straightforward, no nonsense, didn't sugarcoat the complexities, and I needed that energy now. I explained the situation, the request for shares, the pressure campaign, the promises Chloe had made to her parents, all of it. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a moment before she walked me through scenarios I hadn't even considered. Once her parents owned shares, they could potentially sell them to third parties. They'd have rights to financial information and could dispute business decisions. And in the event of a divorce, which she said I should absolutely be considering now, those shares could become leverage in settlement negotiations. Even if they seemed nice and uninvolved at the moment, I'd be giving them legal power over my company. And based on what she'd heard about my fiancé's behavior, did I really think they wouldn't use that power if things went south? The way she laid it out made my blood run cold. I'd been so focused on the principle of the thing, the disrespect and manipulation, that I hadn't fully thought through the practical disasters waiting down that road. Sarah spent the next 20 minutes explaining how to protect the business legally, making sure the operating agreement was ironclad, documenting everything. She said something that stuck with me: the best defense isn't just legal documents. It's being willing to walk away from people who don't respect your boundaries. That no prenup in the world will save you if you marry someone who thinks your assets are community property before you even say I do. I thanked her, paid her consultation fee, and sat in my car outside her office building. How had I gotten here? 3 months from a wedding, with deposits already paid on the venue, photographer, catering, all non-refundable. And I was questioning everything about the person I'd planned to spend my life with. The financial hit from canceling would be significant, probably close to $15,000 down the drain. But that seemed like nothing compared to what I'd lose if I went through with marrying someone who operated like this. That evening, I drove to Chloe's apartment, the one she'd been staying at more often since our fight. I knew before I even knocked that this conversation would end one of two ways either. She'd back down completely and apologize, or this relationship was over. She opened the door looking tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well either. For a second, I felt bad. Felt like maybe I was being too rigid. But then I remembered her mom's phone call. The lies, the manipulation. And that sympathy evaporated. We sat in her living room, and I told her clearly, no room for interpretation, that I would not be giving her parents shares in my company. Not now, not ever. Not as a wedding gift, or an investment, or a symbolic gesture. This was my final answer, and the conversation was closed. I watched her face go through several emotions, surprise that I was this definitive, then anger that I wasn't budging, and then something cold settled into her expression. She told me I was being selfish and greedy. That this is exactly why people say entrepreneurs are terrible partners. That I cared more about my business than the people in my life. I let her finish. Waited until she was done. Then I said what I'd been avoiding for weeks. This isn't love, Chloe. This is entitlement. You don't respect what I've built. You don't respect my decisions. And you don't respect me enough to be honest with your own parents. She stared at me for a long moment. I could see her trying to decide if there was an angle left to play, some way to turn this around. But I'd made up my mind, and she could tell. She said we were done then. I agreed. And just like that, 3 months before our wedding, the relationship was over. I pulled the engagement ring from my pocket, the one she'd left at my place the week before, and set it on her coffee table between us before I walked out. The aftermath was messier than I expected. Her parents called me within 2 days, confused and hurt. Chloe had told them I'd suddenly changed my mind, and they didn't understand why. I kept it simple. Told them there had been a miscommunication, that the shares were never actually offered, and I was sorry they'd been misled. I could hear the disappointment in Mrs. Thompson's voice, but also something else. Maybe a hint that she knew her daughter had overstepped. The next few days were a blur of cancellation calls. Explaining to the venue coordinator, the caterer, the photographer that the wedding was off. watching those non-refundable deposits disappear one by one. Mutual friends started reaching out, asking what happened. I realized Chloe was controlling the narrative, painting herself as the victim of my cold businessman routine. Then she posted something on social media. Nothing explicit, just a vague statement about how some people value money over relationships and how she dodged a bullet with someone who couldn't prioritize family. I watched it get dozens of sympathetic comments from people who had no idea what actually happened. For about a week, I debated responding, setting the record straight publicly. But then Emily, a mutual friend who'd actually bothered to ask my side, told me that several people had already figured it out. Chloe had been telling different versions of the story to different people, and they weren't adding up. Plus, everyone who actually knew me knew I wasn't the greedy type, that there had to be more to it. She was right. Within 2 weeks, the social media post had been deleted. Some of Chloe's closer friends quietly reached out to apologize for jumping to conclusions, and the whole thing faded into the background noise. I focused on work. Threw myself into a new project with a client I'd been chasing for months, and slowly the weight of those last few months started lifting. Mark took me out for drinks one Friday night. Sitting across from me at our usual bar, he reminded me I'd dodged a nuclear bomb. That if I'd married her, and then she pulled this kind of thing with something even bigger, my life would have been destroyed. I knew he was right. I'd seen exactly who Chloe was when she didn't get what she wanted: manipulative, dishonest, willing to damage my reputation to protect her ego. That person would have made my life miserable. Sitting here now, 6 months after everything fell apart, I can say with complete certainty that ending that relationship was the best decision I ever made. The business is doing better than ever. I just signed 2 new major contracts. My team has grown to 18 people. I'm not looking over my shoulder, wondering what I'll be pressured to give up next. That $15,000 in lost deposits? It turned out to be the cheapest lesson I ever learned about the importance of boundaries and recognizing manipulation when you see it. I didn't lose a fiancé. I dodged a lifetime of someone treating my life's work as something she could just trade away to make her family happy. And honestly, that's worth celebrating. What would you have done in my shoes?